Welcome everyone to our fourth and final webinar in the State Heritage Emergency Partnership webinar series. My name is Lori Foley and I'm Vice President of Emergency Programs at Heritage Preservation. Today's webinar producer is Program Assistant Caitlin Lee with technical backup provided by our Director of External Affairs, Jessica Unger. In the lower right of your screen is a questions box. And as Kate has pointed out prior to the start of the program, we're unable to share the questions box with everyone in this webinar platform. But throughout today's session, please feel free to post questions there. We'll hold on to those questions and pose them to Mark during breaks in the presentation. And if we can't get to all the questions in the time allotted, I'm sure Mark will be happy to follow up. In fact, I know he'll be happy to follow up. And we'll post those questions and answers on our State Heritage Emergency Partnership webinar page. Also, if you're experiencing technical difficulties, let us know via the question box and we'll work with you via that box to sort things out. This series of 4 webinars has been made possible by a Laura Bush 21st Century Librarian Program grant from the Institute of Museum and Library Services. Our partner in this project, the Chief Officers of State Library Agencies. Information about this and the other 3 webinars in this series is posted under Webinars on the Partnership website. Here, our instructors are sharing some great recommended resources, and here too, you'll find a handout for note-taking, as well as a PDF of the PowerPoint slides. Soon after the webinar has concluded, we'll post a link to a recording of the webinar. And then, please feel free to share that link with your colleagues and constituents. The webinars constitute just one facet of our State Heritage Emergency Partnership project. We also post information on the project blog that represents news you can use. The blog is also a means to share the accomplishments and, yes, even the challenges of state cultural and emergency management agencies that are striving to collaborate through their partnerships to move emergency preparedness forward in their states. Not receiving blog posts? That's because you still haven't signed up. Go to the blog at the URL noted. In the right-hand column, scroll down to the heading Follow Blog via Email. Enter your email address and click on the Follow button, then look for the confirmation email in your inbox. You'll receive new posts directly in your inbox, and we promise not to flood it. If you have any questions about signing up or anything else that's related to the State Heritage Emergency Partnership Project, please don't hesitate to contact us. And now, I'm pleased to introduce today's instructor, Mark Randall. Mark has served as a media and public spokesperson for the SBA Disaster Assistance program nationally, regionally, and on a local level throughout the country. He develops and facilitates communications on SBA Disaster Assistance and disaster preparedness with private industry and federal, state, and local governments. Prior to joining the Small Business Administration, Mark was a small business owner himself and has experience in the financial and construction industries. The SBA has a wealth of information about emergency preparedness and disaster assistance. The links to these sections of SBA's site are among the resources listed on Mark's webinar page. Mark, thank you so much for joining us today. And before I hand over the controls, let's see who's in our audience today. We're going to have a couple of questions. Okay, let's look at the first question and figure out who actually is constituting our audience today. I am a member of the cultural heritage community, the emergency management community, or another community entirely. Please go ahead and select one. Okay, I think that's not too tough a question. We could probably see what our results are. Okay, so 2/3 of you are from the cultural heritage community, 1/4 of you are from the emergency management community, and 8% of you are from a completely different community. So welcome all of you. This is a really great representation. All right, our next question has to do with the SBA itself. My organization or agency has used at least one of SBA's services or resources. So please select one of the following choices: yes, no, and I don't know. And I imagine people can answer that question pretty easily as well. So let's see. All right, so most of you, 43%, have never used SBA services or resources. So I think you'll find this an extremely valuable presentation. So now, without further ado, Mark Randall.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Lori, for the introduction, and thank you for the opportunity to speak with everyone about SBA's disaster loan programs. On the slide there, most people are familiar with SBA, Small Business Administration, for their capital, counseling, and contracting. They facilitate federal contracting with the government, with the small businesses, and they provide counseling for small businesses and capital formation through their guarantee loan programs. However, there is another aspect of SBA that doesn't present itself until there's a declared disaster declaration. I'm advancing the slide, I believe. There we go. When there's a disaster, SBA's Office of Disaster Assistance comes into action. And through SBA's Office of Disaster Assistance, we go to areas where there's a declared disaster to provide assistance to those that have been impacted by the disaster. Now, this assistance is the primary source of federal assistance for private property owners. And that can be, as it states there, homeowners, which would be residents, renters, business of any size, as well as private nonprofit organizations. Mostly throughout today's presentation, we're going to focus on the private nonprofit aspect of the program. We'll also hit on the other points because disasters hit, they're indiscriminate and they affect the entire community. So it's important to have a basic understanding of what SBA's role is to help not only the organizations, but their employees, the other residents in the entire community in their recovery. SBA's program is low-interest loans. We have two types of loans. First is for property damage. And again, that's for homeowners, renters, businesses of any size, as well as the private nonprofit organizations, to obtain a low-interest loan to help them recover, repair, replace their damage to their property. Now, this could be in the state of a question of a homeowner, their home, their primary residence, their personal belongings, including their automobile, so that'd be for renters also, and for businesses and private nonprofit, their machinery, equipment, inventory, facilities, leasehold improvements, that type of damage. For private nonprofit organizations, they are eligible for these property damages, regardless of the size of the private nonprofit organization. The key thing is that the ownership. Private nonprofit organizations that are owned by a government entity are not eligible for SBA disaster assistance. So that's the key thing there. If your entity is owned by a government entity, then it's not eligible for SBA disaster assistance. If that's unclear, then we urge everyone to come in and to talk with us because we'll help you determine that exactly how that is. Sometimes there is a private nonprofit organization that's part of something that actually is a separate entity. So we need to go through that on a case-by-case basis to make that determination. The second type of loan is for working capital. We call them economic injury disaster loans or EIDLs. This is to help meet working capital needs that are caused by the disaster. These loans, again, are available to small businesses involved in aquaculture, and businesses of any size that, private nonprofit organizations of any size. These loans are to help meet those needs that the disasters cause, and there does not have to be property damage to apply for these type of loans. So if the entity was fortunate, didn't have any property damage, but their income was impacted in some way by the disaster, then there's eligibility for that type of a loan. Working capital loans, the key thing here is, again, If the nonprofit organization is owned by a government entity, then the entity is not eligible. If it's a religious organization, it's not eligible for the working capital. However, it still has eligibility for property damage if it's a religious organization. Some of the things we're going to be talking about today is the declaration process. So how does that happen? What takes place? The types of declaration, SBA's disaster loan program, and preparing for the unexpected. What kind of things need to be considered to be ready and to go forward in case of a disaster. And again, we're going to focus on the private nonprofit aspect of this as we go through. The key thing first is assessing the damages. When there's a disaster, the first thing is to determine what's the extent of the damage. So we encourage everyone to report the damage. Usually it's reported to the local emergency management agency, which could be a county or city agency, but to report the damage. And it's important to have that ahead of time and understand that that is a key factor, because the way that works is the information on the damage goes to the county officials, then it goes to the state, and then the state determines the contact with the federal agencies, FEMA and SBA, as to if they're going to request federal assistance. So they're communicating with the SBA and the federal resources in the FEMA to determine that. So if there's been any damage or impact, it's important to report that damage or impact to your local authorities. And to try and be specific and brief with it. If you had damage to your facility and sometimes you're actually leaving a message, but if you just said, well, we have a hole in the wall, that wouldn't be the kind of thing they'd want. They'd want, we have a 10-foot hole in the wall, or we have a 2x4 came through the wall. Something specific so they can know the magnitude of the damage, because that's going to come into play as they call for these preliminary damage assessments. These damage assessments are to go out and actually verify and document the damage that has occurred. If they request a damage from FEMA, then SBA will participate as well and in that damage assessment, and we will go along. The assessment team from FEMA is looking at different things than SBA is looking at. So that's why both agencies provide different assistance. So it's important that they assess the damage for their assistance programs that they have available. They may request a damage assessment only from the SBA. In that case, then FEMA would not participate generally, and SBA would do the damage assessment with the state and local officials. Again, the key here is when the state has made that request, that locally they've determined what the damage is and where it is, addresses, what the extent of it is, so that when the assessment teams come in, they can go to that assessment and do that assessment and include all the damage and get it done as quickly as possible. So if there's going to be assistance, that the information that they're collecting can be acted on. One of the other keys is in keeping in mind how that assessment can be made, and this is for the local officials, sometimes they will determine if the area is flooded and it can't be accessed. Sometimes they can do it aerial. They can do other means of doing that verification. And then they do have the old boots on the ground, door-to-door type of a assessment as well. So it's an attempt to, they want to see all the damage that's there so they can make that determination. Again, the types of disaster loans are for physical damage are available, and economic injury are available. Both types of loans are available when there's what we call a presidential disaster declaration. You may have heard the term presidential disaster declaration, and the government's all into the acronyms. So we have IA for individual assistance, or PA for public assistance. If there's a declaration for either one of those, there is eligibility for SBA disaster loans for both economic injury and property damage. Then if we have an administrative or agency declaration, that's a declaration made by SBA, and again, both the property damage and the working capital loans are available under the administrative or agency declaration. Then there's 4 other types of declarations. 3 of those private nonprofit organizations have eligibility for: the governor's certification, the Secretary of Agriculture, and the Secretary of Commerce. We'll go through those a little bit, but again, briefly as we go forward. In a presidential declaration, FEMA is for presidential assistance. FEMA is the lead agency, and they're the coordinating agency, and they provide assistance under the individual assistance category and under the public assistance category. There's a whole realm of assistance they provide. We're not going to go into that here. That would be something you want to get from them, so we're not going to try and go into the program they have at all. But they have an extensive program, and there's all different levels of assistance available. So those are things to be aware of, and if there is a declaration for that. Generally, the individual assistance is for individuals and households. The public assistance is for infrastructure. When the President declares a major disaster for individual assistance, SBA Disaster Loan Program is automatically activated. That's for residents, businesses, and most private nonprofit organizations. When the President declares a declaration for public assistance, this is where it's limited what's available from SBA. SBA's Disaster Loan Program is activated for certain private nonprofit organizations that provide essential services of a governmental nature. We're going to go into what that is in a little bit of detail so you can have an understanding of that. Under a presidential declaration, private nonprofits should contact the state emergency management officials, and they will have the information about the public assistance or PA applicant briefings. This is very crucial and very important. Now, if your private nonprofit organization has had damage, and if you reported that damage, then they're going to be aware of that, and they're going to be aware of when they come and verify the damage. So you're probably going to be in that loop on getting notified about the public applicant briefings. It's important, though, if not, to inquire about that and to get the word out on those applicant briefings. FEMA makes the determination if the private nonprofit provides essential governmental services and is a critical facility as defined by law. And again, we're just going to touch on this briefly. So for the details, you need to refer to FEMA.gov. You can get the information from them. But FEMA generally is considering critical service such as fire, emergency services, electrical, power, water, supply, some irrigation, telephone communications, sewer and wastewater treatment, direct medical, etc. And again, it's always best to inquire if there's something that it's not covered here and you're not clear about, to apply, and they will help you. I can tell you this from working in disaster assistance, that everybody I've worked with in the federal government in both FEMA and SBA has always been ready and willing to answer all the questions and look if there's any way under the program laws and regulations that we have, if there's any eligibility, and we will investigate that with you and proceed with your application process and help in that regard. FEMA defines non-critical services as museums, educational facilities, zoos, custodial care facilities, libraries, alcohol and drug rehabilitation centers, community centers, battered spouse programs, homeless shelters, low-income housing, shelter workshops, food programs for the needy, senior citizen centers, daycare centers for special needs, etc. And again, same caveat that this is just a guideline. In a disaster scenario, sometimes it comes down to a case-by-case scenario to determine what exactly the eligibility is. A private non-profit facility that provides non-critical essential services that are of a governmental nature must first apply to SBA. So if you went to the applicant briefing and FEMA determined that you are not critical, then you would apply to SBA, and SBA may be able to approve a loan. If SBA is able to approve a loan and it doesn't meet all the needs, then you may be referred back to FEMA for possible additional assistance. Or if SBA is not able to approve a loan, you may be referred back to FEMA for assistance in that regard. Now, if you have an organization that has emergency repairs, debris removal, anything of that nature, you can apply directly to FEMA for that. So those type of things, emergency, that's why it's always best to start out with FEMA. And again, the more information you have in regard to what damages you've and how you've been impacted, then it can be determined what assistance is available to you and what your eligibility is. If you were not eligible for an SBA loan, again, this is just covering that if you're not eligible, if we're not able to give you a loan for the amount, then we refer you back to FEMA for additional grant assistance. So the key here is, and thing to remember is, first, make sure that you report the damage to local officials that are collecting that information, usually the emergency management on a county level. Next, then, if there is a disaster declaration for PA, for public assistance, a presidential disaster declaration, you need to investigate and look for the information on the applicant briefings. That's a key point in that regard. Now,
okay, Mark, before we move on, we do have one question, and it is, I actually have a couple of questions too. So first, can you describe to us what is meant by, or give us some examples of essential services of a governmental nature?
Okay, those would be those would be services that would normally be or could be provided by a government, and so sometimes the government doesn't provide those services directly. They have a nonprofit organization that provides those services, Meals on Wheels, that type of thing, museums, anything that's a community resource, a senior center. Many times they have an entity that is not owned by the government, but it's a separate entity that provides those type of services. So those type of services can be provided. And again, that's why if you're providing any kind of community services, really you should investigate and go to FEMA and see where you're going to fall within that, if they're essential, if they're critical, if they're non-critical, if they're essential for the public assistance. And that's important on the public assistance declaration to keep in mind. On public assistance, it's limited to public assistance. So a private nonprofit organization that is not in that category, not providing those kind of services, is not going to be eligible under a declaration, a presidential declaration for public assistance.
Okay, so we have a couple of questions. One, first referring to the essential services of a governmental nature. So would that be something similar to a community action program, CAP?
Yes, and again, it's hard to give an answer on these, on specifics, but it could be, and that's why any organization that's providing community services should really come and apply under a declaration for public assistance to see if there's eligibility. And it will be fully, on a case-by-case basis, looked at to see if there is eligibility. When there is a declaration, the federal, whether it's FEMA or SBA, we're looking to find eligibility, because these aren't discretionary applications. These are whether there's a disaster happened, there's been an impact. So we have the program and the laws that have been given to us, and we're looking, okay, how can we find eligibility? Is there eligibility under our program guidelines for this? So it could be that. It's a little hard to I don't want to go and say it is or it isn't, because in some instances it could be and some it couldn't be, depending on the details, and all that has to be determined when we find out the specifics of each situation.
Okay, that's great. So that's one lesson for us all. Make sure you have the contact information for your regional SBA person so you can start with those investigations. So I think what you're saying is that non-critical services such as provided by organizations such as historical societies and archives and museums are eligible for loans, but they need to apply to the SBA first, correct?
Correct.
And then, what happens? Will FEMA automatically turn an applicant over to SBA if for instance, it doesn't, if an organization applies to FEMA and it's not for debris removal or emergency repairs, will FEMA automatically turn that application over to the SBA, or will they just reject it, or like send it back to the applicant?
They will refer them to SBA if they're determined that they're not critical. services. They will refer them to SBA directly. And
Okay,
so,
great. That's good to know.
the key here is too is that they want to apply to SBA, and if for whatever reason SBA is not able to approve a loan or not able to meet all of their needs, then they're going to most likely be referred back to FEMA for possible consideration of assistance. So it's not a you go to FEMA, then you go to SBA, then you're done. If SBA doesn't meet all the needs, then there could be additional assistance back through FEMA. And again, all this assistance is not able to duplicate any assistance from any other organization. So all the assistance that's provided by the federal government cannot be for the same thing if you have insurance or if you get debris removal from FEMA for emergency debris removal, then we're not going to be able to give you a low interest loan for that. So we can't duplicate. So it's all coordinated to make sure we don't duplicate the assistance.
Great. Okay, that's all for the questions for now, and I'll let you get back to your presentation.
Okay. Now, under an IA, or Individual Assistance Disaster Declaration, both SBA's program for property damage and for economic injury are automatically activated. And under this scenario, it's a little different than under a public assistance declaration, because the public assistance declaration, remember, the only entities that are available to are private nonprofits that are providing governmental services. So under an IA declaration now, it's nonprofits, whatever they're providing, for the most part. Now, there's a little bit of a difference in eligibility in IA and PA declarations. In the Individual Assistance Declaration, and it's best to show this with a map, you can see on the left side of the screen, in the Individual Assistance Declaration, if the primary county declared was Eureka in this case, then that is where SBA's program for property damage and working capital loans is available. In addition, the neighboring or contiguous counties, which are shown in green here, are also eligible for the working capital loans. Reason for this being that there could be disasters don't know county lines, and there could be an entity in one of the neighboring counties so the neighboring counties have eligibility for working capital loans. On the right side, the Public Assistance Declaration, the only place that is eligible for the private nonprofits for SBA disaster loans is the actual declared county, which is, in this case, Eureka. Now, once again, there may be an initial declaration for one county, Eureka County, and as they get more information, there could be an amendment to that declaration. They could add on a county. So again, it goes back to the, if you are a private nonprofit organization that has been impacted, to report your damage to county emergency management officials, whatever county you're in. So they have that information. They can determine, and then if that gets to a level where they can have a survey there, and then they can be included or apply to be included in the declaration. So again, that's key is getting that information to them, and so they have an accurate picture of what the information, what damage has been done. Now, in smaller disasters, the state can come to SBA, and SBA makes an administrative or agency declaration. This activates both SBA's physical and economic injury disaster loan program. And again, for all the same for the homeowners, renters, businesses, and private nonprofits of any size for the property damage, and small businesses and private nonprofit organizations for the working capital. Now, what SBA needs to do this is SBA is going to go out to document the damage, and we need to find at least what we would term major damage to at least 25 homes or businesses, and businesses would include private nonprofit organizations, where there's at least 40% uninsured property loss or damage. And that could be, if it was an apartment building, then if all the belongings for those individuals in the apartment building were lost, that could be considered a major if they did not have insurance, if they lost all their belongings. So it could be based on their personal property if they're a renter, or based on the primary residence, if it's a resident, or a business, or a private nonprofit organization. 40% of the pre-disaster fair market value of uncompensated or uninsured losses. That's what we're looking for, and we can have an agency declaration. That's within the county or the jurisdiction of that area. That's on a county basis. So again, it goes back to reporting all the damage and getting that in there, so if they have a picture of the damage, where to go and to find out about the damage. And again, SBA property damage and economic injury are both available in the contiguous counties as well. So an agency declaration, I've got to show that with a map. An agency declaration, on the left-hand side, if we had Eureka County declared for an SBA agency declaration, all the neighboring or contiguous counties would have eligibility, and all the private nonprofits in those counties would have eligibility for both property damage and economic injury. Unlike in the presidential declaration for individual assistance, where it's the only place for property damage is in the actual declared county. So again, there's no cost or obligation to applying to FEMA and registering with FEMA and applying to SBA. So we really encourage everyone to register with FEMA, and if they're referred to SBA from FEMA, then to apply to SBA to find out what is available to them. I was telling Lori a story earlier about when we're out in a disaster declared area, when we meet with folks and we talk with them, and I'll tell them, now I'm going to be here in 3 or 4 months from now, I'll meet with you again. And those 3 categories you'll fill in. The category you'll say, I remember you told me to apply to SBA, even though I didn't think I needed it. Well, I did apply to SBA, and I was approved, but luckily I didn't need it. And that's okay. That's a good outcome. The next category will be, I know you told me to apply to SBA, but I thought my insurance would cover everything. I thought it would be okay, but it didn't work out, and I needed it. And luckily I applied like you recommended, and I needed that. And that's a good outcome. The third outcome is not a good outcome, where it's, I know you said to apply, but I just really didn't think I needed it, but then something come up, and now I need it, but there's a deadline to apply, and it's past the deadline to apply. So again, it's really important to seek the disaster assistance. We have many times in a disaster, people will say, well, there's other people worse off than I am, so I don't want to apply because I want them to get the assistance. And that isn't applicable in the federal assistance program. You're not going to be getting assistance, and someone else is not going to get it because you got it. If you're eligible, then you can apply. Whether you accept assistance, whether you accept the SBA loan is up to you. You have plenty of time to determine that, but it's good to have that in your planning. A lot of times we've had instances where people have applied and they thought, that they would be able to overcome disaster on their own resources, and then something happens in their personal situation, financially, there's something happens, and they're just not able to do what they thought they were able to do. Well, it's nice to have the SBA disaster loan as a backup if they need that. So it's just another tool to be able to have in your planning and your recovery. Economic injury disaster loans are available to meet the needs caused by disasters, even if they didn't have physical damage. So that's another important aspect of it. You may have been impacted by the disaster, but you were lucky to have no physical damage, but all your customer did, and that may not manifest itself right away. You may not know that, so it's good to apply if you think you're okay, because you may not know how long you're going to be impacted economically. Now, on the working capital loans, we don't make a loan for lost sales or lost profits, but we make the loan for needs caused by the disaster. Overhead expenses, payroll, those type of normal operating expenses that the entity, the business or nonprofit, would have been able to pay had the disaster not occurred. And I'm going to go through these really quickly. Under this economic injury disaster declaration, there's a governor's certification where This could be where there was a bridge out, a mudslide, something where it impacted an area, and there's at least 5 businesses that were impacted economically. So they're, again, reporting the damage to your local county officials, and they'll determine if they can request this type of declaration. And if that declaration is made, then the economic injury disaster loans are available to all the small businesses, private nonprofits, agricultural cooperatives. Under the next type of declaration is the Secretary of Agriculture. When the Secretary of Agriculture makes a declaration for the farming industry for drought, excessive heat, snow, rain, whatever it is, we mirror that declaration, and the USDA declaration covers the farming industry and their businesses. SBA declaration covers a non-farm community, which would be non-farm small businesses, and again, it includes private nonprofit organizations that were impacted either directly by the incident, whether it was a freezing or whatever the reason for the declaration was, or if they were impacted because they're dependent on the farming industry for their revenue. And the next one, real quickly, is the Secretary of Commerce. It's not rare, and it's generally there's a fishing failure. And again, the same economic injury working capital loans are available under that program. We'll spend a lot of time with that. And then the last one, I'm going to go over this. This is the military reservist EIDL, and this is if you have a small business and someone, a key person in that business is called up to active duty, then the business may be eligible for a military reservist economic injury disaster loan. So that's, again, not for nonprofits, but that's just something to know if you know anyone that's in that situation. SBA has a lot of powerful tools to help make disaster recovery affordable, because this is not a discretionary type situation when business is trying to recover. We offer low interest rates, long terms up to 30 years. Refinancing may be available in some instances. These are our interest rates recently posted. We have 2 rates, what they call no credit available elsewhere, which is a little bit of a misnomer. Basically, if you have very little damage and you have a lot of cash flow and a lot of assets, and you essentially don't need a disaster loan, then you're going to pay the credit elsewhere. For nonprofits, it's the same rate either way. But most of our loans are made at the lower rates. For homes, we can loan up to $200,000 to repair or replace a primary residence, $40,000 for personal property, including vehicles, and up to $200,000 for refinancing. And we can increase the loan up to 20% of the verified loss to provide measures that will prevent the same type of damage from occurring again. For private nonprofits, they fall in the business loan category. It's up to $2 million for machinery, equipment, furniture, fixtures, and up to $2 million for economic injury or working capital. The combined loan limit is $2 million, however, so that it could be a combination of either one of those. We're looking for eligibility. Is the entity in the declared county. Credit history. There we're looking for, essentially, is there 2 things. Is there a reasonable assurance based that there'll be repayment of the loan based on the credit history, or they're current on their current obligations? And is there sufficient cash flow to afford the new loan? The loans are direct from the federal treasury, so these aren't guarantee loans. So we have a dual stewardship to disaster victims and applicants as taxpayers, as well as disaster applicants, and providing a reasonable assurance that the loans will be repaid. Only uncompensated losses, again, if there's insurance. Now what we do, though, is, again, we urge people to apply early, because there's been many times when we've approved the loan, dispersed the loan, people have rebuilt while their insurance is still pending. When the insurance comes in, it's used to reduce the amount of the loan or pay off the loan. And any compensation that's received that's a duplication of what we've loaned for has to be applied to the loan. So many times, if there's other things that come available, then that money is used to replace it. You don't have to wait till the insurance settles, though. You don't have to get a contractor's estimate. The best thing is apply for the loan, and as you're going through these other things, you can find out if you're going to need the loan. And then maybe things will get settled, you won't, maybe you will, and then when you get the money from the insurance or other recovery, you can pay down the loan. If there's a previous SBA loan agreement that has not been met, then that makes that entity ineligible. We determine the term and the repayment based on each borrower's financial ability. So it's going to be based on what the cash flow is and how much that cash flow can afford and allow money for other contingencies and unexpecteds and repay the loan. The payments are deferred on the SBA disaster loans till, in the case for a business, till the business is back to normal if they've had economic injury. So we're not going to give you a loan for working capital and then have you start paying it next month. It's going to be when you get back to normal in your sales. So there's a deferral payment. The interest is simple interest. There's no fees or points. There's no application fees to apply. The interest is only charged on the amount that's dispersed as you receive it. So it's very beneficial terms to the borrower. Some of the businesses aren't available or multi-level sales organizations, hobby businesses, speculative businesses, and there's others. I'm going to go through all of them right here. There is refinancing available in some aspects. Again, if there's substantial uncompensated loss, so after insurance and other compensation, if there's substantial losses, then if in order to make that loan, we need to refinance part or all of the existing mortgage, then we're going to look at that and say, can we make this loan? Now, that has to have the lender's agreement to re-amortize, if we don't pay off the entire loan, to re-amortize the remaining balance on that loan. And again, it's all made looking to make it affordable to repay the loan. We do require collateral if it's available, but we do not decline the loan because there's no collateral. So if there's collateral available for physical disaster loans and an agency declaration, any loan over $14,000 is required to have collateral if it's available, and $25,000 for presidential declarations for property damage. For working capital loans, it's $25,000 in either type of declaration, and collateral is required. The loan process, that's all determined as you're going through it, and you're told what you need as you go through it. There's a slide on that. Give you the $14,000 for the agency and the $25,000 for individual assistance. I would just like to relate one thing too, as far as from the standpoint of what we've learned from businesses that have been impacted in communities, is that one thing that really helps in the recovery is getting back to normalcy. And some people may not think that, they may think there's other priorities. We had an applicant, 3 people that were going to start a gymnastics business in Joplin, and they were actually doing some final touches when the tornado hit there a couple of years ago. They hadn't opened yet. They were going to open in a week and a half, and lifelong dream to open this gymnastics school, and their building was flattened, and they lost everything. And so they were pondering whether to go into business or not. They didn't know, well, people are recovering, and they were thinking how people probably won't want to be enrolling their kids in gymnastics, and they went through a whole process. And then in talking to the community, they found out that there was a need, and through an SBA loan, disaster loan, they were able to refinance the business and open the business, and it was a remarkable success because they had 10 employees. They ended up increasing to 23 employees. They met their 3-year goal in the first year and a half they were in business. It was just phenomenal what they did, and it was just on the community desire to have some normalcy in the community. I think this comes over into the private nonprofit area, and as far as having libraries, museums, and community resources, being able to say, let's walk over, let's drive over to one of the community resources, getting back to normalcy is a great help to recovery in the community, both from a physical as well as emotional and standpoint. So it's a good thing to try not delay a recovery, and if you're going to, and that's why you want to apply to find out what resources are available and then move forward with recovery. And it's not only going to help the entity but the community as well. Okay, the insurance
Okay,
requirement.
Mark, we have. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Just a point of clarification. In a presidential declaration, if the application is rejected by SBA and the questioner said has in parentheses FIT, does a not-for-profit become eligible for FEMA grant dollars?
Well, the FIT is generally for individuals and households, and that generally meets failed income test. So that would be generally individuals and households. If there's a disaster declaration, presidential disaster declaration for individual assistance, when the person applies to FEMA, they're going to ask how many people are in the household and what's the household income. And then they have a scale, and if they look at that scale and say for this number in the household and this income, it doesn't look likely that they're going to be able to afford a disaster loan. So they're not going to refer them to SBA in that situation. But that's, again, for individuals and households. So they're not going to get referred to SBA. Now, they can still come and apply to SBA, and we can take a look and see, but that's just an expedited process to try and determine if this household is not going to be able to afford a disaster loan. They don't want to have them to go apply when, from the information they have of number in the household and income for the household, it's very unlikely they're going to be able to be approved for a disaster loan. Now, if there's a rental property in the household or a small business in the household, some other aspect that has non-cash items on a tax return, then they'll need to go ahead and go through the SBA disaster process. So that FIT is normally in that regard. Now, if a nonprofit is applying to SBA and they're not approved for a loan, then they can ask for reconsideration. So if we have declined for whatever reason, we're going to provide a letter that says this is the reason for our decline, and you have up to 6 months to ask us to reconsider that application. So maybe it was a matter of there was something amiss on a credit report or Dun & Bradstreet, or there was something that could be overcome. Because again, we're looking for repayment ability and establishing that. So that's saying if there's additional information, we can reconsider this. But the FIT is generally not a term that I would think would be associated with a private nonprofit. Private nonprofit would register with FEMA and be referred to SBA directly.
Thanks, Mark. And that brought up a question in my mind. What about people who are self-employed, like artists? Can they apply to SBA as a small business, even though it is just they themselves?
Yes. Yes, any small business can apply. And again, I'll give you an example. We had a lady that was making shirts and printed shirts, and she was doing it out of her residence and was flooded. And so she applied for an SBA disaster loan. We gave her an SBA disaster loan for her inventory. She lost her inventory. So any business that's filing a tax return as a business. Now, if it's a hobby that someone's just doing and they're not really, there's not a profit motive, or they just like to do it, and the Internal Revenue Service has certain rules that govern a hobby business or not a hobby business. But if it's a hobby, it's not covered. But yeah, any small business of any size. So it can be a one-person operation, a sole proprietor, a limited liability company, a partnership, a corporation, a rental property. If a person owns a rental property, then that rental property is considered a business, and they can apply it in that regard.
Great. Okay. Thank you. No more questions for now.
Okay. We're going to require insurance on the collateral. It's not going to, and that's just if there's the hazard insurance, if it's whatever is applicable for the area. And then also, if it's in a flood zone, we're going to require flood insurance. Or if the damage was due to flood, there's going to be a requirement for flood insurance. Because again, it's not going to help someone to have the same thing reoccur. You just can't put a loan on top of a loan to repair the same type of thing. So we're going to require that flood insurance. That's a beneficial thing to do. Next, I'd like to go over our website and some resources we have on our website. If you go to our website, and I'll use the pointer up on the top there, it says local assistance. If you click on local assistance, it has a number number of resources you can look for and click on something in your area. And if you go down on the right-hand side down there, you can see Disaster Apply Online or information. And if you click on that link there, it'll take you to the next screen coming up, where it has all the different types of loans and information. So it has the little icons in the center, and then down the left side it lists, if you want to know if there's a disaster, current disaster in your area, you can click on the current disaster declarations. They're in there by state. You can find out what declarations are currently open. It has a lot of information there on specifically on disaster loans and type of disaster loans. It has a place where you can download the forms, so you can get the actual application forms and put them on there. It's a great resource on our website. If you type in emergency preparedness, you can look up that as well. We'll go into that a little bit later on. When you get to the application, there's 3 ways to apply. We're actually you can apply online off of our website on a secure line. You can apply in person with a representative at a center that we establish in the area, or you can apply by mail and mail a paper application in. When there's a declared disaster, applying online is going to be the quickest. All the applications are processed in one center for the whole country, and they're processed in the order received. So if you have been in a disaster, you want to apply as early as possible, get in line as soon as possible to find out if we're going to be able to move forward with your application. We're going to establish either, if it's a presidential disaster declaration, there'll be disaster recovery centers, local assistance centers, federal and state centers, where FEMA will be. We will be wherever FEMA is at in that regard for individual assistance. If it's an agency declaration, we'll establish SBA Disaster Loan Outreach Centers. And if there's a business community that's been impacted to a large degree, we'll set up a business recovery center. So in these centers are going to have people there where people can come in and meet with people individually, one-on-one, and we'll answer all their questions, help them with the application. We have now actually set up computers in these facilities so where you can apply right there online, check everything out, push a button, and your application's into the processing mode. So it can expedite that process for you to get into the system and get your application rolling on that regard. Again, you can mail the application in. That information is going to be on the application as well. Once you've applied, that's the first step for the process. The next step is we're going to verify the property and the loan, and we're going to make a loan processing decision. We can make you the loan or not. We actually will have a verifier come out to verify what it's going to cost to repair or replace your property. That's going to determine the starting amount of the possible loan, what it's going to cost. Now that amount is going to usually change in all instances because it could be more, it could be less due to other recoveries or due to hidden damage. So that's just a starting point to see if we can approve you for that loan amount. Modification of that amount is almost all the time made. So there could be several modifications as we learn more information. Then we're going to close a loan. Again, you can do it at one of those centers. We'll have people there where you can go actually into the center there. But we'll go over all your loan documents. It's itemizing out what the money is to be spent for, to repair or replace, how it's going to be spent. The money is dispersed as a construction loan. The funds are dispersed to go through that process. Filing deadline is 60 days from the date of the declaration, and in most cases. It can be extended under a presidential declaration. If FEMA determines that they need to extend that, they can extend that, and for larger declarations, as needed, they will. The filing deadline for economic injury loans, and this is whether it's a presidential, for individual assistance, for public assistance, it's 9 months. And that's because it may be a longer time to manifest the actual economic injury. Again, that's why it's important to apply as early as possible. Another great disaster assistance I'll put this. One of the things that we do when we open up these business recovery centers is we pair up with our business resource partners, these small business development centers, SCORE and women's business centers, and they provide a free service to help people that have been and help businesses that have been in a disaster. This is for small businesses, so I'm not going to touch a lot on this, but it is a good resource. So if you are aware of any small businesses, that they'll help them at these centers to maybe rethink their marketing, reorganize how they're doing things to recover from the disaster. It's a real good source of recovery help for businesses to overcome the disaster. And SBDC was one of the counseling entities that helped the gymnastics company in Joplin. This is their websites, and they're also on our website. When you go into that website of ours under local assistance, it has a link to all these, so you can get those from right there also. And then lastly, I just want to talk about a few things. Be ready, be proactive, plan to survive a disaster and to recover. And these are important aspects of a disaster. To be ready, be proactive, and plan to survive and recover. And that takes a little bit of planning ahead of time. Prepare for the unexpected. There could be roads cut off, freeways cut off. There could be communications down. You don't know how your area is going to be impacted. A little bit of research as to what you're prone to in that area can help, or what disasters are more likely, depending on the part of the country you're in. Out there. If you have been flooded, you have to put a dryer in. If your records are all flooded, you're not going to be able to contact your customers, your vendors. You want to store records away. And one of the big key things is insurance coverage for your buildings, the contents of the buildings, and business interruption. So it's always good to review that and to find out what's available. Another key thing for private nonprofit organizations is if you have one person that's kind of heading this all up, their home may be flooded. This is the kind of scenario they may be looking at home. You need to, again, be prepared for the unexpected, that there could be a scenario where the person that had all the answers is pretty busy in their own personal life. So have contingency plans and plan, again, to continue. We've got, back to our website, if you put in emergency preparedness, we've got all kinds of links where you can go in and all kinds of aids to prepare a plan, prepare a continuation of operations plan, and to continue on with your business or your organization. Plan to stay in business, prepare for the unexpected and report damage, and apply for all available assistance. These are kind of some of the key points. Thank you for your time. If anyone has any questions, the best and most direct way is you can call our Disaster Customer Service Center National Office at this number. You can email them, or you can go to our website. But if you want to contact someone and know what resources are available in your area, you can call them. They can also tell you what disaster declarations are in your area, or if you need to contact someone about disaster preparedness information. One of the field offices, we have 2 field offices that cover everything in the United States. One in Atlanta that covers everything east of Mississippi, and then one in Sacramento covers everything west of Mississippi. But this one number and this one contact can be your most direct contact to SBA Disaster Assistance at whatever level you need. Thank you again for the opportunity. Appreciate it.
Okay, Mark, I think that was really comprehensive. For any of you attending, you're most welcome to think about questions. We still have time, and Mark is available, so here's your opportunity to think of some other questions. In the meantime, I have a last item I'd like to share with you. You'll soon be receiving an email that contains a link to a brief 7-question evaluation, and for those of you who have attended previous webinars, you'll be quite familiar with the format. So please click on that link in that email you'll receive and complete the survey for us by December 17. As I mentioned at the top of the program, this webinar series is brought to you by the generous support of the Institute of Museum and Library Services. Your response to the evaluation can demonstrate the value of the programming, and your feedback can really help us garner future support. And if you missed any of the 4 webinars, you can view the archived recordings on the State Heritage Emergency Partnership website, the URL for which appeared at the top of the program. So let's see. I don't see any other questions coming up. I would like to make a final plug for a publication that Heritage Preservation worked with FEMA on, and with funding from the Institute of Museum and Library Services, as well as the National Endowment for the Arts. And it's a booklet with the very cumbersome but very descriptive title of Guide to Navigating Federal Emergency Management Agency and Small Business Administration Disaster Aid for Cultural Institutions. And this link is listed among the resources that accompany Mark's webinar on his webinar page site. And we are currently getting it updated. Mark, thank you very much, is the one who's updating the components about the SBA, and we have someone from FEMA Public Assistance updating the sections that relate to public assistance. And so that booklet is one that would be really helpful for you to review. It's not exactly great reading, but it's very important reading because it helps you prepare for the inevitable. And when disaster strikes, not if, you'll have an awareness of what kind of paperwork and documentation and the steps that are involved, certainly as Mark has outlined them today. So let's see if we have any other questions. I don't see any. So, Mark, you must have been quite comprehensive. I certainly learned a lot. There are many more opportunities for disaster aid than I was aware of, so thank you very much for pointing those out. Thank you, Kate, for keeping your eyes on the many monitors, and thank you, Jess, for your behind-the-scenes support. And thanks to all of you who logged in today. If you've missed any of our 4 webinars, again, you can revisit them on the SHEP website. So, Mark, thank you so much for your attention to this and for your explaining so much and providing so much information. Happy holidays to everyone, and goodbye.